Hi everyone, welcome to Elvis Presley Past, Present and Future, where we are continuing on with our Elvis journey. Elvis is right on the brink, so let's get straight into it. Elvis made an appearance in 4 consecutive weeks on the Dorsey Brothers television program Stage Show in early 1956, on January 28, February 4, February 11 and February 18. RCA wanted an album in the stores fast to capitalise both on the nationwide TV exposure and the success of his first hit single on the pop charts with Heartbreak Hotel, which swiftly climbed to the top after its release on January 27. At the same time, there had only been 2 series of Elvis recording sessions for RCA Victor by the end of the Dorsey stint, which, after Presley and his band went back on the road. Those 2 sessions yielded an additional 11 tracks, almost enough to fill an entire LP, although some of the tracks had singles potential. His first album was called Elvis Presley. It went both gold and platinum and was released on March 23, 1956. The rights to the Sun studio tapes had transferred to RCA Victor with the sale of his contract, so 5 previously unreleased Sun songs, I Love You Because, Just Because, Trying to Get to You, and I'll Never Let You Go, Little Darlin', along with Blue Moon, were added to 7 of the RCA Victor session tracks to bring the running time of the album up to an acceptable length. Phillips produced the sessions at Sun, and no producer was officially listed for the RCA Victor sessions, leading to the belief that Elvis himself produced them. Travelling and personal appearances and new record releases continued. The condemnation and controversy continued, along with the ever-growing popularity. On April 3, 1956, he appeared for the first time with Uncle Milty. The Milton Berle Show, one of the most popular programs of the golden age of television, was broadcast live from the deck of the USS Hancock on NBC, while docked at the naval base in San Diego, California. Elvis was now being managed by Colonel Parker, since Bob Neal's contract expired on March 14, 1956, the day after the release of Elvis's first LP. They had already appeared on television 6 times by then, on the Dorsey Brothers show. They performed 3 songs, Shake, Rattle and Roll, Heartbreak Hotel, and Blue Suede Shoes. Elvis also performed a comedy sketch with Milton Berle, acting as Elvis's twin brother, Melvin. It was the first time they had performed to an all-military audience. Every one of his appearances featured either Elvis close-up singing a slow ballad or full body, with his movements somewhat restricted by his acoustic guitar that he was playing. Among his selections on his second appearance was a playful, sensuous performance of Hound Dog that drove the kids in the audience wild. The next day, the press and some of the adult viewers were appalled. It is one of his most controversial performances. Elvis's performance of Hound Dog on the June 5th, 1956 edition of the Milton Berle Show stands out as one of the greatest moments of his whole career. Elvis was in his prime. He put the guitar aside, and America witnessed for the very first time the 21-year-old Elvis Presley from head to toe, gyrating his soon-to-be famous or infamous pelvis. Reaction to Elvis's performance in the mainstream media was uniformly negative. Mr. Presley has no discernible singing ability. For the ear, he's an unutterable bore, wrote critic Jack Gould in the next day's New York Times. His one speciality is an accented movement of the body that has been primarily identified with the repertoire of the blonde bombshells of the burlesque runway. The gyration never had anything to do with the world of popular music, and still doesn't. In the New York Daily Times, Ben Gross decided his performance is tinged with the kind of animalism that should be confined to dives and bordellos, while the New York Journal American's Jack O'Brien said, Elvis makes up for vocal shortcomings with the weirdest and plainly suggestive animation short of an Aborigines mating dance. Meanwhile, the Catholic Weekly America got right to the point in its headline, Beware of Elvis Presley. Just a few days ahead of his concert at Roosevelt Park, Elvis appeared on The Steve Allen Show, which was produced in New York. Steve Allen first saw Elvis Presley on January 28, 1956 at the Dorsey Brothers stage show on competing network CBS. Everyone was enthusiastic about the young singer's charm and charisma, and he decided to reserve Elvis for his broadcast on NBC. Although he was not a fan of rock and roll music, Allen could not avoid the fact that Elvis Presley was able to give his audience numbers a big boost. Allen was encouraged to drop him from the show. In fact, on June 22, 1956, Charles Mercer wrote an open letter to Allen encouraging him to drop Elvis from the show. Mercer concludes by writing, "My argument against his appearance is simply lack of talent. I can't for the life of me why you would want to have such an untalented guy on your program." Elvis was booked for the first Steve Allen Show in July. He flew to New York on a charter flight on June 29, 1956 to rehearse for the show. On Sunday, July 1, 1956, the day it was broadcast, Elvis arrived at the Hudson Theatre in New York, where the taping was taking place that afternoon. After the King of Rock and Roll had signed a few autographs in the front of the theatre, he immediately met with host Steve Allen to discuss the details of his performance. He told Elvis to sing the song Hound Dog. Elvis, who entered the stage dressed in a tuxedo, sang his hit Hound Dog to a dog with a hat, which Elvis later described as the most embarrassing performance of his career. With Elvis wearing a tux and singing Hound Dog to a basset hound, comments were made by many fans saying that Allen was attempting to humiliate Elvis in this way, but there is no evidence that Allen was setting out to embarrass Elvis or humiliate him. As Allen pointed out in his autobiography, his show was a comedy show and ultimately didn't suit Elvis. And it wasn't just Elvis who was presented in comedic fashion when singing. Perhaps the big mistake was Parker's for signing Elvis to a TV show that was inappropriate for him. Elvis might have been embarrassed by the experience, as he changed his story about the show and his thoughts on Allen a number of times. Hours after the show aired, Elvis told Hy Gardner that he really enjoyed the show. Then he told Wesley Ryder, a writer for TV Star Parade, that he had been made to stand like a biddy, with the writer saying that Elvis vowed that he would never sing in that restrained, subdued fashion again. In 1972, Elvis told the makers of the Elvis on Tour that he thought Steve Allen was as funny as a crutch. And then in 1974, with Allen in the audience, Elvis says, "Steve Allen had me on his show. Steve has a weird mind, you know. He's a funny kind of man, you know. He's brilliant, genius of comedy. He had me dressed in a tuxedo, singing to a little fat dog. I love him for it, but I'll never forgive him." On Steve's show, after Hound Dog, there followed a version of I Want You, I Need You, I Love You. Then in another sequence, the young singer, disguised as a cowboy, performed under the name of Tumbleweed. A young freelance photographer named Alfred Wertheimer was hired by RCA's pop record division to take some press photos of the young new recording artist they'd recently hired. Wertheimer first observed Elvis with his camera on March 17 in New York and followed him for some weeks, taking famous, well-known pictures of a young Elvis. Anne Fulcino, the head of PR at RCA Victor, had seen some of Wertheimer's work and liked it enough to occasionally assign him to a freelance job. On March 10, 1956, Wertheimer was working in the darkroom when Anne rang. She said, "Are you available next week? I'd like you to photograph Elvis Presley. We signed him up last November and haven't got any pictures of him yet in my files." A week later, Wertheimer met Anne at CBS Studios in New York. Anne took the 26-year-old photographer backstage where she introduced the two young men to each other and let Elvis know that Wertheimer would be taking some pictures of him. Elvis essentially grunted, Wertheimer recalls, and didn't even look up. I thought to myself, well, that's okay with me. I'm the fly on the wall. He doesn't have to be sociable. With time to kill before the live television performance later that evening, Elvis headed back to his hotel. And now, Wertheimer says, I'm his shadow. We got along fine. He was quiet, introspective kind of guy, and so was I. Two quiet nerds getting along together. At the hotel, Elvis read fan mail and eventually fell asleep. Some of the fan mail was 6 or 7 pages long. Wertheimer remembers he was going to read every page. The next morning, Elvis is in the bathroom, shaving. Wertheimer says, in a moment of inspiration, or perhaps blessed innocence, "Hey, could I come in to the bathroom and continue our photo session?" Incredibly, Elvis said, yes. He's combing his hair. He's looking in this little lady's mirror. He's bare-chested. He has pimples on his back and a boil on his left shoulder. And you would think he would be very conscious of that. But he was totally unself-conscious. In 1956, Wertheimer didn't see Elvis again until he travelled to Richmond, Virginia, where Elvis was performing at the Mosque Theatre. While there, Wertheimer captured the greatest off-stage photos of a performer ever made. Barbara Gray was from Charleston and had spoken to Elvis on the phone when he performed there. They agreed to meet 2 days later in Richmond, where Elvis would be performing at the Mosque, now the Landmark Theatre. Elvis sent a car to bring her to Richmond, where Wertheimer was chronicling Elvis. Elvis captured a lot of photos that day. Wertheimer got photos of the couple, a lot of them. Elvis and his new acquaintance at the Jefferson Hotel Diner in Richmond, Virginia, June 1956. Elvis pretends to lean in for the kill. Wertheimer never knew her name, but identified her as Presley's date for the day. Elvis, now 21, and his mystery blonde, caught in the kiss. The kiss, one of 48 shots taken by Wertheimer that day in a stairwell at the Mosque Theatre in Richmond, Virginia, minutes before a concert in 1956. As Wertheimer approaches the couple unnoticed, Elvis closes in on Barbara in the theatre stairwell. With Wertheimer perched above, Elvis pulls his date in with clasped hands and a smouldering glare. The photographer slides past the couple to find an angle with better lighting. Elvis goes in for the kiss and misses his mark. Elvis pulls back and pauses, taunting Barbara with a kiss before he hits the stage. Barbara, 85, is a retired real estate manager from Charleston. She said, family and close friends have known for years that she was the mystery blonde, and they had urged her to go public. After Richmond, Barbara and Elvis never met again. Elvis, along with his band, Colonel Parker, his cousin Junior Smith, and Alfred Wertheimer, boarded a train from New York City's Penn Station. Elvis was returning home to Memphis. It was a 27-hour trip home, and Elvis spent some of the time listening to the acetate copies. He had 3 new songs, playing them over and over on his portable record player. Even as a young artist, Elvis was deeply and critically immersed in his music. Alfred Wertheimer recalls, on the 27-hour train ride to Memphis, Elvis was bored. In an attempt to entertain himself, he picked up a stuffed panda, put it on his left hip, and walked down to the other end of the car. I picked up my camera and followed him. The passengers on the train didn't know what to make of Elvis. I mean, 21-year-old men don't usually walk around with a 4-foot panda. But Elvis paid them no mind. Halfway up the aisle, he made a sharp left and looked at 2 teenage girls. He looked them straight in the eyes and said, "Are you coming to my concert tonight?" "Well," they said, "who are you? What concert?" He then said, "I'm Elvis Presley. I've got a concert at Rustwood Park tomorrow night." "Well," they said, "how do we know you're Elvis Presley?" Elvis said, "You see that photographer over there? Do you think he'd be taking my picture if I wasn't Elvis Presley?" That whole time I'd been standing on one of the seats shooting him, chatting up with the girls. And that was the explanation that seemed to satisfy him, Wertheimer recalls. After a 27-hour long trip, the train was nearing Memphis, and Elvis went to freshen up. But after washing his hands, he finds out that there are no paper towels. Not making a big fuss, he shakes his hands dry. When the train finally got near Memphis, Elvis asked to get off at a stop near the outskirts of town called White Station. It was closer to his home on Audubon Drive than the main station. With only the acetate cuts, no luggage or instruments, he hopped off the train and headed down a grassy knoll towards the sidewalk of this little town. Between telephone poles and Cadillacs, Elvis stopped to ask a black woman on the street for directions, and then turned to wave to us on the train, Wertheimer said. As the train started moving, I quickly figured that I was better off taking pictures of what was going on in front of me instead of jumping off the train and following Elvis. If I had stopped to collect my bags and all my equipment, I would have missed out on what was one of the last times he could just walk down the street like an ordinary guy. When Elvis reached Audubon Drive, he was welcomed home by his mother Gladys, his father Vernon, his grandmother Minnie May, and his sweetheart Barbara Hearn, along with other cousins, friends, and neighbours. The next day, July 4, Elvis relaxed before he had to go on stage at Rustwood Park. Elvis was in his new pool, but since the water valve was stuck, the pool was filled with a garden hose attached to the kitchen sink. 6 hours later, the pool wasn't even half filled. Elvis also had to call out to his mother to come and take his watch, which he had forgotten to remove before jumping into the pool. The concert at Rustwood Park was a fundraiser for the Cynthia Milk Fund of the Memphis Press Shitma and Variety Club, the home for convalescent children. It featured over 100 performers, including 4 bands, 5 dance groups who performed in great heat in a show that lasted more than 3 hours. The 97-degree temperature that day didn't stop the fans, which began gathering at 9:30 a.m. for the evening performance. His hometown fans bought tickets as if it had been years since they'd seen him, even though Elvis had performed in Memphis just 3 weeks earlier at the Cotton Carnival. The concert was billed as not just a rock and roll show, but it was clear the crowd was only there to see Elvis. There was a reported 14,000 fans. To the Memphians, Elvis was always their beloved hometown hero. The sheriff arrived at the Presley home in his police car, and Elvis sat in the middle of the front seat between the sheriff and Colonel Parker. When they arrived, Elvis moved the surging crowd that was trying to get as close as possible to him. In the audience were Elvis's family and his girlfriend, Barbara Hearn. Dewey Phillips served as MC and was apparently in top form. He did an impression of old Elvis and new Elvis, demonstrating for the enthusiastic crowd how restrained Elvis had been on the Steve Allen Show, and telling them that Elvis would now perform, swiveling hips and all. Elvis was dressed all in black except a red tie and red socks when he took the stage, joined by Scotty, DJ and Bill. The crowd suddenly came alive and rushed to him, but the police were prepared. Policemen and firemen were stationed in the front of the stage to maintain order. Elvis asked the crowd politely to return to their seats because it made it difficult for people in the back to see. He was particularly eager to cut loose because just a few days earlier he had been censored on the Steve Allen Show. During the show, Elvis tells his cheering fans, "You know, these people in New York aren't going to change me none. I'm going to show you what the real Elvis is like tonight." And he moved his hips like he had before. The crowd was thrilled, and the screaming was so loud that the neighbouring hospital provided increased dosages of sleeping pills to patients. Unfortunately, 2 fans couldn't attend the concert. Mrs. Mincy and her 12-year-old daughter Ellen were looking forward to seeing Elvis perform that evening, but tragically they were injured in a car accident on the way to the show and forced to spend the night in a hospital bed instead. Elvis heard of their accident and decided to pay the unlucky mother and her child a visit at the hospital. According to the next day's Memphis newspaper report, Elvis spent 20 minutes with the pretty bruised up ladies. On July 27, 1956, Elvis did a typically unexpected thing when he turned up at the Blackwood Brothers all-night gospel singing at Ellis Auditorium. He entered the stage and sang 2 songs with the Statesman Quartet, "Jesus Filled My Every Need" and "You'll Never Walk Alone." During his excessive touring, Elvis used his free time to go back home to Memphis to relax and have fun and visit friends. One of these friends was Sam Phillips, who he would visit in his son's studio. This picture was taken in Audubon Drive. His Audubon home, the last week in September of 1956. Sometimes he brought friends from Hollywood with him to show them around Memphis. One of these friends was actor Nick Adams. Elvis took Nick to visit Joey Phillips at his radio show. Police Captain Woodward was there. Everyone in Memphis and all of Tennessee thought so highly of Elvis that they made him a captain in the Tennessee Highway Patrol, and they presented him with his gold badge. Elvis was not made an honorary captain, but he was made an actual captain. When Elvis received the badge, he said, "I hope I'll be able to do something or say something that will make teenagers drive more carefully." It was a memorable day for him. On the way off to the Mid-South Fair, Elvis and Nick Adams found Captain Woodward and his men. They pulled up to the captain, and Elvis yelled, "Howdy, Captain!" Woodward spotted the gold badge on Elvis' shirt and said, "Howdy, Captain. Welcome to the police force." Elvis was very proud of that badge and what it stood for. He carried it in his wallet everywhere he went. Then on Sunday, September 30, 1956, Elvis flew to Los Angeles to start work on his first movie, Love Me Tender. Well, that's it, guys. Next time, we'll be getting into the movies. We'll take a look at Love Me Tender, how it came about, who the other actors were, how Elvis liked performing with Deborah Paget. We'll have a look at her life, and we'll start to get into the Hollywood scene. Hope you enjoyed, guys. Don't forget to hit the like button, hit the subscribe, make your comments. You all take care, and I'll see you all next time. Bye.